This year marks the 5th anniversary of my marriage. I recently had a child and am learning to cook, which is something I am not used to as a homemaker. My husband and I are getting along well, and he enjoys the food I cook every day, saying it's delicious. My daily life is free of problems, but there is one thing that bothers me. Our parents. My parents have both passed away, so I'm talking about my husband's mother, or should I say, my mother-in-law. Since we got married, I've had this feeling about my mother-in-law. I am sure my mother-in-law dislikes me and avoids me. We haven't had many conversations since we got married, so I was terrified because I had no idea what she thought of me. When I thought about my mother-in-law, I felt uneasy about a variety of issues. My father-in-law had passed away, and my husband was concerned about my mother-in-law living alone. So he had previously discussed the possibility of us sharing the house with her. I honestly felt uneasy and disliked the idea, but she hadn't done anything wrong to me. And since I understand my husband's concern, I was willing to accept it. However, my husband later told me what his mother had said. I absolutely don't want to share the house with you, because it's too suffocating. Now that you're married, you should spend time together as husband and wife. I was relieved to hear that, but also disappointed because I assumed she didn't like me after all. But there was no conflict between my mother-in-law and me, as I often hear from my friends. Of course, I definitely did not want to argue with my mother-in-law. So I was relieved when there was no more talk of sharing the house. I do have occasions to interact with my mother-in-law, such as when I went to greet her for the New Year's holiday. But within 30 minutes, she said to me, "You shouldn't stay here for so long. Go home and relax." I considered myself fortunate to be able to return home early, but I also felt kind of lonely and confused. I was worried that my mother-in-law disliked me because we hadn't had a chance to talk like that. My mother-in-law is still working, and I think it's because she has a fairly straightforward personality that I got the impression she was a little intimidating. But my opinion and feelings about my mother-in-law changed one day. One day, my husband left something at my mother-in-law's house. List of all the other things, he left his bag containing materials for work, and I had no idea what to do. My husband is concerned about my mother-in-law, who lives alone and often visits her at home alone. But because he goes there so frequently, he appears to have forgotten something. My husband says he really needs it tomorrow, and he knows the materials are there because he spoke with my mother-in-law on the phone, so it's fine. But he asked me to go and get it for him because he couldn't pick it up today. I had no reason to refuse because I am a housewife, so I decided to take the child and go pick it up. Even though I was only going to get something he had forgotten, I felt it would be impolite to leave without a gift. So I considered purchasing some pastries and giving them to her as a gift. However, since my husband was usually with me, I didn't know anything about my mother-in-law's preferences. I was at a loss for what to do, so I texted my husband asking him what his mother liked. I got a surprising response. "Then you can prepare something for her to eat and bring it to her," he said. I thought it was impossible, but since I was learning to cook and my husband's reaction was positive, I decided to bring her a meal. But I was worried about what to bring. She doesn't have a preference, so I believe she will be content with anything. That is what my husband said to me lightheartedly. I knew I couldn't make a mistake here. I looked through various recipe books and considered, but I couldn't make up my mind. After thinking a lot, I came up with an idea. Even though I had no idea what my mother-in-law liked, if my husband liked it, perhaps she would as well. With that, I immediately took action. I made stew, fried fish, and fried rice right away. My husband enjoys all of these foods. I put the rice and the stew in a Tupperware and left to get the items my husband had forgotten. When I arrived at my mother-in-law's house, I received my husband's bag and took out the food I had prepared. "You're welcome to eat them for dinner. I'm not sure if you'll like them," I said as I handed them over to her. She received them and said, "Don't you want to join me for dinner?" I was already nervous, but that unexpected offer made my heart skip a beat. "Sure," I responded reflexively. Because of the suddenness of the situation, I responded in a stiff, strange tone. I have no idea what my mother-in-law thinks of me. What would she say to me? Maybe she'll say something about the meal's flavor. To be honest, I was so anxious. I wanted to go home. That was my true feeling. I wanted to flee before she said anything. But I felt it would be impolite to refuse in this situation, so I went inside. I began preparing the meal as soon as I got inside the house. I was considering what I would say if she criticized me. I served the meal I had brought to my mother-in-law on a plate. She was looking closely at the meal. While I was regretting not bringing something more appealing, she smiled with great joy. I haven't had a home-cooked meal in decades. It looks delicious." Surprisingly, she was overjoyed. And no matter what she ate, it was delicious. She complimented me like that. I, too, was relieved and ate with my mother-in-law. We talked about my husband's favorite foods, our children, and so on over dinner. I was able to talk with my mother-in-law about things that I didn't have a chance to chat about yet. The mother-in-law who eagerly listened to my husband's and children's stories was nothing like the image I had of her. She was a sweet person with a very gentle smile. She confessed something to me after the meal while we were having tea. I was thinking that nowadays, young people don't want to be friends with their mother-in-law. So I avoided interacting with her, fearing that I would make her feel uncomfortable. What she said to me sounded very sad. For the first time, I discovered that my mother-in-law was extremely shy. And my mother-in-law said, "I'm glad that the first meal my daughter prepared was a home-cooked meal, and that I hadn't had it in a long time. It's delicious and pleasant. Now that we're here together, it's like a dream come true. I'm overjoyed," she sobbed, her voice choking up with tears. I, too, began to cry as I remembered my own mother. I received a phone call from my husband while we were both in tears. He was surprised to find me crying and sniffing when I answered the phone. "What's wrong?" he asked, quite surprised. "Nothing. I'm just having an emotional moment with your mother." "What are you talking about?" "Well, I hope it's not a fight or something. Don't forget to bring my bag." He then hung up the phone. When I got home, I complained to my husband about his cold response. He laughed and said he was sorry, but he looked happy. My relationship with my mother-in-law gradually improved after that incident. I had more opportunities to visit her house, and not only did my husband, but I also started taking my children to her house to bring her some food. We also began to make phone calls. My mother-in-law used to call my husband's cell phone whenever she needed to reach us, but now she's calling me on the house phone. Something else happened during her visit. During such a pleasant change that moved me, something else happened. The other day, I was having dinner with my husband. Just to inform him, I said, "I'll see your mother again next week on Monday or Tuesday." My husband, who had begun saying random things to me, began blurting out something. I should have told him this sooner, but after you brought her first meal, my mom called me to tell me that she had eaten a home-cooked meal for the first time in decades. It turned out that she had called my husband after I had left, and he continued. "Since my father died when I was a child, she's been trying to keep her head up and raise me on her own. My mom is a strong woman, so she doesn't say it, but I think she missed me a lot when I got married. But then she ate your meal." She was relieved to discover that I had married a good person and was living happily. I listened quietly to my husband's long story. My eyes were welling up with tears. Hearing what my husband said made me truly happy. She realized that I had married the right person and told me that her hard work had finally paid off. My eyes couldn't keep the tears from streaming down my cheeks any longer, but my husband didn't seem to mind. He straightened his back and said, "Thank you for marrying me. Thank you for getting along with my mother." My husband bowed his head, sobbing. My heart was full seeing him like that I burst out crying. But for when our child was born, I've never seen my husband cry. My husband was crying just as hard as I was. It was a minor incident with my mother-in-law, but I never expected it to have such an impact on me. We used to fight over insignificant things when we were dating. I don't think I'm a good wife in comparison to a homemaker who handles housework, childcare, and a full-time job. I am probably not as supportive of my husband as I should be. However, I realized how fortunate I was to have such a wonderful husband and mother-in-law. They made me happy too. I am filled with gratitude. I still cry just remembering the incident. My husband and I are currently discussing the possibility of sharing the house with my mother-in-law once more. I like to think of a way for us to live happily together as a family, whether we live together or not. I don't know how long I'll be with my husband and mother-in-law, but I'll never forget this feeling.